I stood at the mailbox in my robe, the morning dew soaking through my slippers as I shuffled through envelopes someone else had already opened. Insurance, credit, bank, torn, resealed, violated. The sharp scent of my daughter's perfume still clung to the paper. She told me I should crawl into a nursing home, that I was too old to manage my own life. But while she plotted to take everything I built, I was building something else, a case. She thought I'd go down quietly. Instead, I took her down in court. Every lie, every debt, every stolen dollar. She wanted me out of the way. So I gave her what she never saw coming. Bankruptcy. Wait. Before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and buttered rolls, the kind of meal Evelyn Parker had once taken pride in preparing herself. Now she sat at the far end of the long oak table, hands trembling slightly as she pulled her chair closer. She moved slower these days. Yes, but she still had dignity. That didn't stop her daughter from slicing it apart with a single sentence. Dana's voice cut sharper than the carving knife. Honestly, Mom, maybe you should just crawl into a nursing home already. Save us all the trouble. The words clung to the air like smoke, settling over the table with a heaviness no one dared disturb. Rick gave a weak chuckle, the kind of laugh that disguised cowardice as humor. He didn't look at Evelyn, just stabbed at his potatoes like the plate demanded his loyalty. Across from him, Dana's two teenagers sat stiff, staring down at their plates. They shifted uncomfortably, chewing in silence, unwilling to meet their grandmother's eyes. Their embarrassment spoke volumes, but not a single word left their mouths. Evelyn's heart pinched. It wasn't their fight to pick, but their silence still cut deeper than she let show. The scrape of utensils replaced the conversation. Evelyn smoothed her napkin in her lap, fingers tight around the fabric. She refused to give Dana the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. Instead, she reached for her water, letting the cold wash down the fire building in her throat. Dana leaned back, smirking as if her cruelty were wit. What? Don't look at me like that. Everyone's thinking it. She tipped her glass, wine swirling lazily, daring anyone to challenge her. No one did. Evelyn finished her plate in silence, her jaw set with quiet determination. Every bite felt like a promise, measured, deliberate, unshakable. When she rose from the table, she moved without a word, only the soft scrape of her chair against the hardwood breaking the tension. The evening air outside greeted her like a balm, cooling the flush from her cheeks. Cicadas screamed from the pines lining the driveway, their relentless song steady against the silence she carried. Evelyn inhaled deeply and walked to her car, each step slow but certain. Dana thought she'd forced her to crawl. She had no idea she'd just pushed her mother to stand taller than ever. Later that night, Evelyn sat across from her best friend Janice Coleman at the kitchen table. A plate of cookies sat untouched between them. Evelyn's story spilled in clipped sentences, while Janice listened with a scowl that deepened with each detail. That ungrateful vulture. Janice finally snapped, palm smacking the table so hard the cookie plate rattled. She wants you gone so she and Rick can play house in here. I've seen the way she eyes this place, like a predator circling prey. The minute you're out of the way, they'll be feasting on your savings. Evelyn stared at the rising steam from her tea, the bitter taste of Dana's words still coating her tongue. But underneath the sting, something colder and sharper was stirring. She repeated Janice's accusation softly, as if testing its weight. They want me gone so they can feast. Her gaze lifted, steady and unflinching, and Janice leaned forward, recognizing the fire forming behind her friend's calm. Evelyn placed her teacup down with deliberate precision, the porcelain click loud in the quiet kitchen. Then her lips curved, not in warmth but in resolve. Then I'll starve them. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds of Evelyn Parker's study, striping the carpet in pale gold. Dust floated in the beams like restless thoughts as she knelt in front of her old mahogany file cabinet. Her fingers, steady despite the arthritis, worked the small brass lock until it clicked open. She had kept everything, every deed, every pension statement, every savings account ledger, organized with the precision of someone who had long understood that paper carried power. She pulled the drawers open one by one, sliding folders out onto the desk until the surface was covered in neat piles. Mortgage records, insurance policies, bank statements, each page smelled faintly of ink and age. But they weren't relics. They were weapons, sharpened by decades of careful keeping. Janice Coleman sat across the desk, glasses perched low on her nose, her sharp eyes scanning each document with the speed of a hawk. She tapped one folder with her finger. Every receipt here is a bullet, Evelyn. Every transfer, every signature, it's ammunition. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin, measured line. Then let's load the chamber. The determination in her voice made Janice grin. The two women worked in tandem, sorting, stacking, cross-referencing. By the time the clock struck 10, the desk looked less like a retiree's workspace and more like a war room. That afternoon they carried the neat stack of folders into the polished office of Harold Benton, a civil attorney with a reputation for grinding entitlement into dust. The walls behind him were lined with legal texts, but his demeanor was anything but stiff, calm, calculating, with the kind of patience that unnerved opponents. He leaned back in his chair as Evelyn and Janice laid the documents across his desk. "Impressive," Harold murmured, flipping through a deed with a practiced eye. "Everything in your name, pension intact, savings untouched." He paused, meeting Evelyn's gaze. "And they assume they'll inherit it?" "Assume?" Evelyn's voice hardened. "They're counting on it. Dana made that clear last night." Harold tapped the papers lightly, as though considering the weight of her words. Then his mouth curved in a slow, deliberate smile. "Then let's bankrupt those dreams now." The sentence hung in the office like a verdict. Janice's grin spread wider. Evelyn felt the knot in her chest loosen, not relief, but resolve, solid and cold. Over the next hour, Harold outlined possibilities: trusts that skipped over Dana entirely, civil suits if Dana overstepped again, protective measures that would lock the house and assets out of her reach. Evelyn listened, not passively, but with sharp questions, each answer shaping the battlefield more clearly. The more Harold spoke, the more Evelyn realized she wasn't defending her life, she was defending her independence. By the time she and Janice left the office, the city outside seemed brighter. Charlotte's streets buzzed with weekday traffic, the horns and chatter echoing a rhythm that matched Evelyn's pulse. For the first time in months, she felt not cornered, but armed. That sense of control carried her through the evening, even as she sat in her living room with her tea cooling on the side table. But across town, the same evening, Dana Parker clinked a mimosa glass against her friends at a trendy uptown brunch spot. The chatter of silverware and low music wrapped around her, but Dana's voice cut through it, loud enough to make the women at the next table glance over. She lifted her glass with a smug tilt of her chin. "This house," she said, savoring the words, "will be mine sooner than later." The laughter that followed wasn't warm. It was sharp, approving, the kind that fed Dana's arrogance. She basked in it, sipping sweet orange and champagne, entirely unaware that the foundation of her certainty was already shifting beneath her feet. At an upscale bistro in Charlotte, the kind with white linen napkins, folded like swans and champagne poured before the menu arrived, Dana Parker held court. She leaned across the table, bracelets chiming as she lifted her glass. "To new beginnings," she declared, her smile wide enough to draw attention from two tables over. "I'll never need a mortgage again. Not when the house falls into my lap." Her friends, polished women in tailored blazers and glossy lipstick, laughed, some clinking glasses, others widening their eyes in mock envy. Dana basked in it, swirling her mimosa as if she were already the queen of Evelyn's two-story home. Back at that very house, Evelyn Parker sat at her dining table, a pen in her steady hand. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the candle she'd lit, a calm counterpoint to the war she was quietly waging. A neat stack of papers lay before her, her current will untouched for years, now under revision. Each stroke of her pen carved Dana further out of the future she felt so certain about. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window where autumn sunlight spilled across the lawn. For a moment, Evelyn almost smiled. She wasn't drafting an ending, she was sketching survival, and it was hers to shape. Later that afternoon, Harold Benton sat across from her in his office, sleeves rolled up, his focus absolute. He spread a draft trust across the desk, tapping a paragraph with his pen. This ensures your grandchildren benefit directly. The house, the savings, the pensions, they bypass Dana entirely. We'll add a provision for local charities, which strengthens the case for your intent. Evelyn nodded, eyes narrowing with approval. Perfect. The future belongs to the children, not the spoiled one who raised them. Harold gave a rare smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. The irony is that the more she boasts, the easier she makes my job. And boast Dana did, while Evelyn signed papers with Harold. Janice scrolled through her phone at a corner coffee shop, eyebrows climbing with every post. Dana had plastered her arrogance online for all to see. Mom doesn't need the house anyway. She barely climbs the stairs. One day soon, this place will be mine. No question. Janice snapped screenshots, one after another, until her phone was a gallery of evidence. She shook her head, muttering under her breath, "She thinks bragging is harmless. Wait until Harold gets his hands on this." That evening, Evelyn and Janice sat together, reviewing the digital trail. The room hummed with the quiet of Evelyn's old grandfather clock, each tick a metronome counting down to Dana's unraveling. Evelyn's lips tightened into something between pride and fury. "She's writing her own confession," Janice said, scrolling to yet another post. "Look at this one." She tagged Rick. "As if a court won't see that as intent." Harold's voice echoed in Evelyn's memory. "She's writing evidence for us." The thought steeled her. Each post, each careless brag, felt like another brick stacked into the wall she was building against Dana's greed. For the first time in years, Evelyn didn't feel like prey. She felt like the hunter, patient and deliberate. But that sense of control cracked the next morning. Evelyn stepped out to the mailbox in her robe, cool dew clinging to her slippers. She pulled the bundle of envelopes free and shuffled through them as she walked back inside. Electric bill, insurance renewal, credit union notice. Only something was off. The insurance envelope was torn, the flap resealed with uneven tape. Another letter bore the faint smudge of a fingerprint, not her own. Evelyn's stomach tightened as she spread the mail across the counter. Her eyes narrowed. Dana had been here, in her private life, prying open what didn't belong to her. And Evelyn knew in that moment, this wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was trespass. The envelopes lay scattered across Evelyn Parker's counter like evidence from a crime scene. Two were slit unevenly along the top, the edges jagged as though torn by impatient fingers. Another had been clumsily resealed with cheap tape, the kind that clouded over instead of lying clear and neat. Evelyn touched the paper, her fingertips brushing the rough seams, and her pulse quickened. Someone had been inside what was her. The smell of ink and glue rose faintly from the pile, but beneath it Evelyn swore she caught another scent, Dana's floral perfume, sharp and lingering. A bitter laugh almost slipped from her throat. Her daughter wasn't even careful enough to hide the intrusion. By noon Janice Coleman sat across the kitchen table, glasses perched on her nose, her expression set in the kind of grim focus Evelyn had come to rely on. She spread the mail out like puzzle pieces. Financial documents, insurance renewals, bank notices, all the juicy ones. She wasn't snooping. She was hunting. Evelyn folded her arms, jaw tight. And now she's left fingerprints all over the bait. Janice pulled her laptop closer, the soft whir of the machine filling the silence as she logged into a credit report service. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, precise and unyielding. Evelyn watched the screen flicker, numbers and records loading line by line. Then Janice's eyes narrowed. "Here, multiple credit inquiries, last 2 months, none of these are yours, right?" Evelyn leaned forward. The names of lenders glared from the screen like flashing sirens. She shook her head slowly. "I haven't applied for credit in years." Janice clicked further. "And look, every inquiry traces back to this address. Not yours. Dana's." The realization sat between them like a live wire. Evelyn felt her chest tighten, but her voice was steady when she said, "She thinks she can build her empire on my name." An hour later, they sat once more in Harold Benton's office. The attorney flipped through the printed reports with clinical precision, his expression unreadable until he finally set them down. Mail tampering and unauthorized credit applications. She's crossed from arrogance into federal crime. Evelyn kept her hands folded in her lap, her nails digging faint crescents into her palms. "Then file it. Every charge we can." She opened the door. "I'll hold it wide." Harold nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll submit the complaint today. Banks don't like identity theft, and judges like it even less." When Evelyn returned home that evening, the house felt colder, its silence heavy. She brewed tea but barely touched it, her mind spinning with the images of Dana rifling through her mail, scribbling applications, laughing at brunch while plotting theft in her mother's name. The betrayal stung, but beneath it grew something steadier: vindication. Dana had handed her the rope to pull tighter. The following afternoon, Rick Parker appeared uninvited on Evelyn's porch. He held his baseball cap in both hands, twisting it nervously. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Evelyn, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Dana, she didn't mean it, all right? She gets carried away." Evelyn stood tall in the doorway, her shadow stretching long across the porch, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Carried away? With my bank accounts? With my name?" Rick shifted uncomfortably, the color rising in his face. "She thought maybe you wouldn't mind." That broke Evelyn's silence. Her eyes flashed as she stepped closer. "The court will decide intent, Rick. Not you, not her, and certainly not me." Rick lowered his eyes, muttered something unintelligible, and shuffled back down the steps. Evelyn closed the door firmly, the click of the lock echoing like punctuation. Later that evening, her phone rang. Harold's voice carried the weight of fresh news. "Evelyn, the bank flagged suspicious activity under your name. Large purchases, cash advances. They're investigating now." Evelyn's hand tightened around the phone. Across the quiet of her living room, the clock ticked louder, each second a reminder that Dana had gone further than she'd ever imagined. The phone call came just after dawn, when Evelyn was watering the chrysanthemums by her porch. The spray of the hose caught the morning light in a glittering arc, but the voice on the other end turned it cold. "This is First National's fraud department. Mrs. Parker, we've identified several credit accounts recently opened in your name, balances in the tens of thousands." Evelyn froze, the hose hissing against the soil. "Excuse me," the representative continued, polite but clipped. "We'll need you to confirm whether you authorize these accounts. One of them lists a secondary user, Dana Parker. Do you know her?" The water overflowed the flower bed, spilling muddy rivulets onto the walkway. Evelyn shut off the hose with a hard twist. "Yes, I know her." By the time she arrived at Harold Benton's office with Janice in tow, her calm was ironclad. Harold spread the bank reports across his desk, the glossy paper reflecting the harsh overhead lights. He tapped the figures with his pen, 5 digits that screamed betrayal. "Multiple credit cards," Harold said. "All under your name. Dana is listed as an authorized user. This isn't just mail tampering, Evelyn. This is identity theft." Janice let out a sharp laugh that held no humor. "She buried you early in debt, like she was already writing the obituary." Evelyn straightened her shoulders, her face unreadable. "Perfect. If she wanted to dig my grave, she'll find herself lying in it instead. She buried me early, I'll bury her credit." Harold leaned back in his chair, studying Evelyn. He was used to clients who crumbled under discovery, who trembled at betrayal. But Evelyn's composure was different, controlled, sharpened into resolve. "We'll pursue a civil suit for fraud and damages. The bank will cooperate. Judges hate elder exploitation." Janice's grin spread, her fingers drumming the table. "Let's give her a bill she can't pay." The weight of it settled into the room. Dana had crossed a line that couldn't be smoothed over with Rick's stammered apologies or brunch bravado. This wasn't gossip or arrogance. It was crime, written in numbers too large to hide. Later that evening, Evelyn sat in her living room. The fraud report spread across her coffee table like a deck of poisoned cards. The faint smell of paper and ink mingled with the lavender candle she'd lit, but the contrast only sharpened the moment. She traced the balances with her fingertip. 48,000, 62,000. Dana hadn't just stolen. She'd built an empire of debt in her mother's name. Janice poured them each a glass of wine, her voice low and fierce. This isn't just about money anymore, Evelyn. She wanted you cornered. Powerless. She wanted you crawling. Evelyn lifted the glass, but her eyes never left the papers. And she'll watch me stand taller than she ever imagined. Across town, Dana Parker was laughing at a friend's story in the same bistro where she'd once toasted her future. But while she laughed, her phone buzzed with an alert she ignored. Her arrogance still intact, her downfall already in motion. Back in Harold's office the next morning, Evelyn signed the complaint with steady strokes of her pen. The air smelled faintly of leather and fresh ink. The only sound the scratch of her signature and the soft shuffle of Harold gathering the papers. He stacked them neatly, his expression hard. "This isn't just about restitution," he said, sliding the documents into a folder stamped with the court's seal. "This is about drawing a line. She thinks she's entitled to your life. Let's make sure the court shows her otherwise." Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her voice calm, deliberate. "File it, Harold. Let her see what it feels like to lose control." Harold stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precision. "Then today we start starving her dreams." And with that, he walked toward the courthouse filing desk, complaint in hand, turning Dana's ambition into the very evidence that would undo her. The knock on Dana Parker's door came sharp and official, 3 raps that rattled through the quiet morning. The sheriff's deputy stood firm on the porch, broad shoulders filling his uniform, the folder in his hand stamped with the county seal. Dana, hair half curled and still in her silk robe, opened the door with a glare that melted quickly into confusion. "Dana Parker?" the deputy asked. "Yes?" Her voice rose, defensive though her chin lifted in bravado. He extended the thick packet toward her. "You've been served. Civil suit for fraud and damages." The words struck like a slap. Dana snatched the papers, flipping them open as though she could shred the accusations by glare alone. Her cheeks flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A dog barked down the street. The morning calm fractured as Dana stormed into her driveway, papers crumpling in her grip. "Fraud? Me? That woman has lost her mind." Across the street, Evelyn Parker stood at her flower beds, watering can in hand. The spray glittered in the sun, catching droplets on her gloved fingers. She didn't look up, not once, as Dana's tantrum swelled. Her serenity was louder than any rebuttal she could have spoken. One neighbor whispered to another at the edge of their lawns, eyes darting between Evelyn's calm and Dana's unraveling. Dana stomped, cursed, waved the lawsuit in the air, but Evelyn only adjusted the nozzle and let the water run over marigolds. By the afternoon, Dana's phone buzzed relentlessly. Bank alerts, declined transactions, frozen balances. She jabbed the screen with shaking fingers, pacing her living room like a caged animal. "What the hell is happening?" she muttered, scrolling through messages that all said the same thing. Access restricted, pending investigation. At Harold Benton's office, Evelyn and Janice reviewed the progress. Harold tapped the printouts with satisfaction. "We filed the injunction this morning. Her accounts are frozen until the court sorts the fraud. No shopping sprees, no brunches on your dime." Janice leaned back in her chair, a sly grin pulling at her mouth. Side effects of greed, sudden withdrawal. Evelyn gave the faintest nod. "Good. Let her sit with empty hands. Maybe then she'll understand what she tried to take." But Dana didn't sit quietly. That evening, she stormed into Evelyn's yard, heels clicking on the pavement, face flushed and wild. Evelyn was trimming roses, the snip of her shears steady, deliberate. "You think this is funny?" Dana spat, waving the lawsuit inches from her mother's face. "Dragging me into court like some criminal? You'll regret this, Mom. I swear, you'll regret it. Evelyn didn't flinch. She set the shears aside, brushing a petal from her sleeve. Her voice was calm, almost soft. Court will decide what's regret and what's justice. The silence that followed was heavier than Dana's threats. She stomped back to her car, slamming the door hard enough to set off a nearby alarm. Tires screeched as she sped away, leaving Evelyn standing tall among her roses. 2 days later, Harold called with the update that would set the stage for everything to come. His tone was even, but Evelyn heard the steel beneath it. The judge has reviewed the filing. They're scheduling a full fraud trial. Dana will stand before the court, and she won't be able to laugh her way out of this one. Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment, exhaling through her nose. It wasn't triumph, she felt. It was inevitability. The crawl Dana had demanded was now a march, and the next step would be public, brutal, and irreversible. By the end of the week, the cul-de-sac no longer looked at Dana Parker the same way. Word of the lawsuit had trickled down driveways and across backyards, moving faster than the mail Dana once tampered with. Curtains twitched when her car pulled out. Conversations hushed when she walked into the grocery store. The very brunch circle that once cheered her mimosa toasts now whispered behind manicured hands. She said the house was already hers. One murmured over a Caesar salad at the country club. And now? Another replied with a smirk. She's the punchline. Dana felt the shift in the air whenever she entered a room. Laughter that used to welcome her now cut off mid-note, leaving silence that prickled against her skin. She doubled down on her perfume, her jewelry, her smile, but none of it disguised the fracture. The community she'd once ruled with casual arrogance had turned spectator to her humiliation. Rick withdrew further each day, as though retreat could erase the scandal. He mowed the lawn at twilight, head low, earbuds in. At dinner he chewed quietly while Dana ranted, never daring to contradict but never offering comfort either. His silence grew thicker than her rage. Meanwhile, Evelyn Parker moved through Charlotte with a quiet dignity that only sharpened the contrast. At the local market she walked the produce aisle with her basket, her posture tall despite the weight of the trial ahead. Neighbors stopped her, not with pity, but with subtle nods of support. A kind smile at the register. A soft, "You're stronger than she thinks." Evelyn didn't reply much. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than Dana's tantrums. At Harold Benton's office, the battle lines were drawn in ink and screenshots. Harold scrolled through Dana's social media feed with clinical precision, pausing every so often to capture a damning post. Dana's words glowed on the screen. "Mom doesn't need the house. She can barely get upstairs. Soon it'll be mine." Janice leaned over his shoulder, chuckling as each line was catalogued. "She wrote her own obituary," she said, shaking her head. "Bragging in public is one thing, but putting it in writing? That's a gift-wrapped confession." Harold's mouth quirked into something that almost resembled a smile. "Juries love evidence that talks without me saying a word. By the time I'm done, her posts will paint her as greedy, careless, and entitled. No need to embellish, she's already done the work." Evelyn sat across from them, hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression composed. The words no longer stung the way they once did. If anything, they gave her clarity. Dana wasn't just reckless, she was sloppy, and sloppy left trails. That night, while Evelyn prepared a simple supper of soup and cornbread, Dana paced her living room across town, the lawsuit packet lying open on the coffee table like a wound. She dialed her friends one by one, but most calls went unanswered. The few who picked up offered clipped sympathy, eager to end the conversation before her desperation spread. Dana slammed her phone down, fury spilling into the quiet house. Rick emerged from the hallway, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe if we just settle things, Dana. Apologize, pay some of it back." "Settle?" Dana snapped, eyes blazing. "Do you want us ruined? Do you want her to win?" Rick didn't answer. He turned away, retreating into the shadows of their home. Dana's mind raced, frantic and cornered. If her accounts were frozen, if the lawsuit gained traction, she needed a shield. She glanced at Rick, at the bank folder sitting on the counter, and her thoughts sharpened. He was quiet, compliant, and his name was clean. She sat down at the table, opening the folder, scribbling forms with quick, jerking strokes. If she moved the assets, transferred what she could into Rick's name, maybe she could buy time. Maybe she could outmaneuver them. The pen scratched across the paper, her hand trembling, her breath sharp. Outside, the night pressed heavy against the windows, as if the darkness itself were watching her plot. The bank's alarm bells didn't sound in Dana Parker's living room, but Harold Benton heard them loud and clear. He sat at his desk late in the evening, suit jacket off, tie loosened, a steaming cup of black coffee cooling at his elbow. On his screen, a fresh alert blinked from the credit union. Dana had tried moving funds, accounts tied to Evelyn Parker's stolen credit, straight into Rick's name. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clever. It was desperate. Harold's jaw tightened as he reached for the phone. "Get me Judge Anders," he told the clerk on duty. His voice carried the kind of calm that made people move faster. Within the hour, the emergency motion was filed, citing asset concealment and fraudulent transfer. By dawn, the order came down, all attempted transfers blocked, Rick's accounts frozen alongside Dana's. It was a hammer strike before she even realized she'd been caught. When Dana discovered it the next morning, her scream rattled the windows. Rick stood in the doorway, still in his work shirt, staring at the rejected transfer notice on her laptop. "Dana, they stopped it. Everything's frozen." Her face twisted crimson. She shoved the chair back, fists slamming against the table. "You useless coward. You were supposed to protect us. Now your name's dragged into this too." Rick lifted his hands, palms out, his voice brittle. "I didn't even sign anything. This was your plan, Dana. Yours. Don't you dare throw this on me," she snapped, her voice so sharp it sent their dog skittering down the hall. Papers flew as she knocked the folder to the floor, receipts and statements scattering like fallen leaves. She paced, frantic, muttering curses that tumbled into each other. Across town, Evelyn Parker sat in her kitchen, the morning sun spilling across her table. A porcelain teacup rested between her hands, the faint steam carrying notes of chamomile and honey. She sipped slowly, unbothered, while the radio hummed a soft tune in the background. The storm outside her walls couldn't touch her here. Janice leaned against the counter, scrolling through updates on her phone. When the freeze order appeared in Harold's email, she tilted the screen toward Evelyn. "Judge blocked the transfer. She's caged." Evelyn's lips curved, faint but certain. "Good." Janice chuckled, shaking her head. "Checkmate is coming. She's playing checkers, while Harold builds a chessboard." The image brought Evelyn a rare flicker of satisfaction. Dana had turned her own grip into shackles, and the chains were tightening with every failed move. Later that afternoon, Harold gathered them in his office. His desk was stacked with files now thick enough to break spines. "The trial date is confirmed," he said, sliding a printed notice across the table. 3 weeks, full fraud case. Evidence is airtight." Evelyn studied the date, the black ink stark against the white page. It wasn't fear she felt, it was inevitability, carved in legal deadlines. Janice leaned back, crossing her arms. 3 weeks until she's paraded in front of the judge, neighbors, and everyone else she ever bragged to. You couldn't script it better. Harold's mouth curved into the faintest smile. She scripted it herself. We're just following her cues. The weight of it settled into the room, a silence thick enough to feel like stone. Outside the office windows, traffic rolled along. Tryon Street, the hum of engines and horns. A reminder that life moved forward even while Dana's crumbled. That evening, Evelyn returned home, set her tea kettle on the stove, and stood by the window as the water warmed. The kettle's soft hiss grew into a whistle, a rising note that matched the anticipation coiled in her chest. She poured the steaming water, the scent of peppermint filling the kitchen. Calm, steady, certain, that was how she'd meet the trial. Across town, however, the calm was shattered. Dana stood in her driveway, phone in hand, her eyes locked on the glowing headline of the Charlotte Observer's digital edition. The bold letters screamed what she had tried so hard to hide. Daughter faces fraud charges in elder abuse case. The courthouse in uptown Charlotte buzzed like a hive that morning, its marble steps crowded with neighbors, reporters and curious onlookers. By the time Evelyn Parker stepped inside, the air was thick with whispers. People leaned close, murmuring about the daughter who had bragged too loud and stolen too boldly. Every bench in the courtroom filled until bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the hum of anticipation louder than the creak of the wooden floorboards. Evelyn sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded neatly, posture straight despite the weight of the moment. Beside her, Harold Benton organized his notes with surgical precision, his suit immaculate, his expression carved from stone. Janice sat in the row behind, a quiet sentinel, her sharp eyes fixed forward. Across the aisle, Dana Parker swept in late, a flash of designer heels and too much perfume. She smiled as though the room were a brunch table, waving lightly at a cluster of acquaintances who quickly looked away. Rick followed at a distance, his collar damp with sweat, his gaze fixed on the floor. When the judge entered, the room stilled. The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot, and with it the battle began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Harold began, stepping forward. His voice carried a weight that made the room lean in. "This case is not complicated. It is the story of a daughter who told her mother to crawl into a nursing home while she forged, stole and schemed to take everything that mother had built. It is betrayal in its purest form, and it will not stand." He let the words hang, then dropped a folder of evidence onto the table, with a resounding thud. The jury flinched at the sound, already caught in his rhythm. Dana smirked, whispering something to Rick, but her bravado flickered when Harold called his first witness, Evelyn herself. Evelyn walked slowly to the stand, not hunched, not fragile but deliberate. Her shoes clicked softly on the floor, the only sound in a room that had fallen utterly silent. Sworn in, she settled into the chair, hands folded in her lap. Harold's questions came measured. "Mrs. Parker, did you authorize your daughter to open credit accounts in your name?" "No," Evelyn answered calmly. "Did you consent to her tampering with your financial mail?" "No." "Did you intend for her to inherit your house at this time?" Evelyn met the jury's eyes, her voice steady as stone. "She has no claim to what I've built." The jurors leaned forward, scribbling notes, their faces carved with sympathy. Evelyn's words were not bitter. They were precise, grounded in truth. When it was Dana's turn, the shift was palpable. She sauntered to the stand, crossing her legs, her smile practiced. "My mother is confused," she began, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "She forgets things. I was only helping." But Harold's cross-examination sliced through her veneer. He projected her social media posts onto the courtroom screen. Dana's own words flashing larger than life. "Mom doesn't need the house. Soon it'll be mine." Gasps rippled through the benches. Dana tried to laugh it off. That was a joke. Was the credit card debt a joke? Harold pressed, his voice sharper now. He held up a bank statement, the numbers glaring in black ink. Tens of thousands of dollars, all in your mother's name. And you, listed as an authorized user. Dana's smile faltered. She shifted in her seat, words tumbling over each other. She said I could." Evelyn's eyes never left her daughter, unflinching. Dana looked away, her shoulders hunching under the weight of silence. The jury watched, their disgust clear, folded arms, narrowed eyes, notes scribbled faster now. Rick sat at the defense table, his forehead damp, his eyes fixed on the edge of the table. He didn't dare meet Evelyn's gaze. By the afternoon, the tension snapped. Dana's voice cracked as Harold pressed her on the transfers to Rick's accounts. She stammered, contradicted herself, and finally went silent, her arrogance shattered. The judge leaned forward, his gavel resting loosely in his hand. "I've heard enough." His voice carried finality, the kind that silenced even Dana's sputtering protests. The jury foreman rose, verdict in hand. The air was electric, the room holding its breath. The judge's words followed, crisp and cutting. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Evelyn Parker. Restitution ordered. Penalties applied. Liens to be placed against the defendant's property." Evelyn closed her eyes for a single heartbeat, the release subtle but profound. Around her gasps, whispers and Dana's muffled sob broke into the charged air. And with one firm strike of the gavel, Evelyn's victory was carved into law. The liens hit like a storm. Dana Parker never saw coming. One by one, notices stamped with the county seal arrived on her doorstep, each envelope heavier than the last. They bore the same message: property seized, accounts frozen, restitution pending. By noon she was pacing her kitchen, the sharp scent of burned coffee hanging in the air from a pot she'd left too long on the burner. Her rage spilled onto the street that afternoon, when a tow truck rumbled up the driveway, its chain clinking, its engine growling low. The repo crew moved with professional indifference, strapping her gleaming luxury SUV to the winch. Dana stormed out barefoot, her robe flapping, screaming at the men as though volume could undo signatures. "You can't take that. Do you know who I am?" Her voice cracked, shrill enough to send a neighbor's dog barking from behind a fence. One of the crew barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, it's not yours anymore." The SUV groaned as it was pulled up the ramp, tires squealing against the steel. Dana's fists pounded the hood until the driver waved her off. Neighbors gathered at their lawns, arms folded, whispers rippling like wind through leaves. The woman who once boasted champagne dreams was now shrieking in her driveway, powerless. Across the street, Evelyn Parker knelt in her garden, dirt under her gloves, pruning shears in hand. She didn't flinch at Dana's wails. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, listening to the SUV's chains rattle and the roar of the tow truck pulling away. "That," she said softly to Janice, who had joined her with a basket of fresh tomatoes, "is the sound of justice." Janice grinned, eyes glinting. Loud medicine but effective, prescription filled. That evening, Harold Benton called with measured efficiency. "Restitution has been secured. We've moved it into the trust for your grandchildren and designated charities. Every cent she siphoned has been redirected." Evelyn sipped her tea, the peppermint steam rising warm against her face. "Then she lost more than money," she said. "She lost her legacy." The calm held until the next morning, when Evelyn stepped onto her porch and noticed movement across the street. A sheriff's deputy was in Dana's yard, nailing a stark white foreclosure notice to the front door. The sound of the hammer echoed through the cul-de-sac, steady, final, like a bell tolling for the end of something long overdue. Neighbors lingered at their mailboxes, watching with quiet fascination. Dana stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her robe cinched tight as if fabric alone could shield her from collapse. Evelyn leaned against her railing, her teacup warm between her palms. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply watched as the hammer drove the last nail into her daughter's downfall. The hammer's echo still lingered when the neighbors began to gather. They came slowly at first, drifting from porches and driveways, drawn by the stark white foreclosure notice nailed to Dana Parker's front door. The bold black letters screamed what whispers had already carried: the house was gone. Dana burst from the doorway barefoot, hair tangled, the silk robe that once announced luxury now clinging in wrinkled shame. She tore at the notice, ripping it free, but the deputy simply replaced it with another. The hammer struck again, each blow louder than her shrieks. "You can't do this!" Dana screamed, her voice breaking as she stumbled into the yard. "This is my house." The crowd murmured, some pitying, most not. Children tugged at their mothers' sleeves, asking questions hushed by quick shushes. Across the lawn, a neighbor filmed quietly with his phone, the faint buzz of recording mixing with the late summer cicadas. Rick Parker shuffled down the steps behind her, cardboard box in his arms. He didn't look at her, didn't look at the crowd. His shoulders sagged under the weight, not of the box, but of everything he had chosen not to stop. Another box waited by the door. He set the first one down on the curb and went back inside. Dana collapsed to her knees in the grass, clutching the shredded notice against her chest, as though paper could shield her from reality. Her sobs rose high, unsteady, desperate. but the deputy remained unmoved, posting a third notice with the patience of a man who had seen this scene play out too many times. A silver sedan slowed at the corner. Evelyn Parker sat behind the wheel, hands steady, eyes forward. She didn't honk. She didn't wave. She simply drove past at the speed of calm, her gaze steady on the road ahead. In the passenger seat, Janice Coleman let out a sharp exhale. Street looks cleaner without her. Evelyn's lips curved slightly, not in cruelty but in finality. It does. By dusk the crowd dispersed, leaving Dana's cries echoing faintly through the cul-de-sac. Rick carried more boxes out, stacking them silently, until they formed a wall of defeat at the curb. He never met his wife's eyes. He never spoke. Inside the house, rooms once filled with Dana's curated glamour now stood hollow. Bare walls showed outlines where art had hung, dust gathered where furniture had been dragged out in haste. The air smelled of stale perfume and panic. Dana paced from room to room, her hands tugging at her hair, muttering half-formed plans that dissolved into sobs. 2 days later, the notice of auction arrived, stapled boldly to the front post. It named the date, the time, the place where strangers would bid for the home Dana once claimed as her kingdom. The neighbors read it openly, their eyes avoiding Dana's windows, but their whispers louder than ever. She said she'd never need a mortgage again, one murmured to another by the mailbox. And now, the reply came, flat with finality. She can't even keep the roof. Dana saw them whispering. She pressed her palms to the glass, watching her world shrink around her. The weight of humiliation pressed against her chest, heavier than any lien or lawsuit. Rick packed in silence, carrying the last of his clothes into the trunk of his car. Dana clutched his arm as he passed. "Don't you dare leave me in this." He paused, but his eyes stayed fixed on the driveway. "I've been in it the whole time, and look where it got us." He pulled free and walked out. Alone, Dana stumbled to the kitchen table, notices spread like a fan of cards in front of her. The foreclosure, the auction, the liens, each stamped, each undeniable. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the last unopened envelope, the one she'd been dreading. Inside was the formal filing. Bankruptcy. The only move left on a board where every piece had already been taken. The courtroom for bankruptcy hearings was smaller than the fraud trial chamber, but the air inside was heavier. No crowd of curious neighbors this time. No reporters with cameras, just a scattering of debtors, attorneys and the scent of burnt coffee drifting from the hallway. Dana Parker sat slouched at the defense table, makeup smudged, her once polished nails chipped. The confidence that once dripped from every movement had evaporated, leaving only a hollow figure in silk that no longer impressed anyone. The judge read through the filings with clinical detachment. Assets liquidated, vehicles repossessed, property foreclosed, remaining balances unsustainable. Bankruptcy petition granted. Each word struck Dana like a nail driven into a coffin. She flinched at the sound of the gavel, though it landed softer than the fraud trial's verdict. The finality was worse this time. There was no room for appeal, no sliver of strategy left. Her attorney shuffled papers without looking at her. Rick sat 3 chairs away, shoulders hunched, staring at the floor. He hadn't spoken to her since the foreclosure. His silence was louder than any condemnation. Dana whispered, her voice raw. "That's it? It's gone?" The judge didn't look up. "It's gone." When the session adjourned, Dana stumbled into the hallway. The fluorescent lights above flickered, humming low, casting her shadow against the beige walls. She sank onto a bench, clutching the hem of her skirt as sobs racked her. They weren't the wails of the driveway or the tantrums of brunch. They were jagged, broken sobs that left her shaking head buried in her hands. Rick lingered near the exit, torn between pity and escape. He finally turned and walked out without a word. Dana didn't follow. She couldn't. Across town, Evelyn Parker sat in her sunlit living room, the late afternoon glow painting the walls gold. The house was calm, filled with the faint scent of lavender polish from the furniture she had dusted that morning. On the coffee table rested a vase of fresh roses, clipped from her own garden. Her tea steamed gently in front of her, untouched for now. Janice arrived with 2 bottles of wine and a grin that lit her face. She popped the cork with a satisfying crack and poured into crystal glasses. "Well," she said, sliding one toward Evelyn. "She crawled all right. Just not the way she planned." Evelyn took the glass, lifting it with steady hands. The wine was rich, dark, smooth on her tongue. She set it down, eyes fixed on the garden outside. "She mocked me as useless. Now she's the one stripped bare." Janice leaned back in her chair, swirling her glass. "Worthless, and everyone knows it. That reputation she paraded around, gone." The 2 women sat in silence for a while, the only sound the distant chirp of crickets starting their evening song. Evelyn's shoulders softened. For the first time in months, peace felt tangible, like fabric she could wrap around herself. The house wasn't just hers, it was hers unchallenged, hers preserved, hers safe. The next morning, Evelyn unfolded the Charlotte Observer at her breakfast table. The headline stretched across the front page in bold letters, black against white, impossible to ignore. "Daughter loses everything after defrauding mother." The kettle whistled on the stove. Evelyn smiled faintly, folded the paper and rose to pour herself another cup of tea. The restitution check felt heavier than paper should. Evelyn Parker held it in her hand at the credit union, the edges crisp, the ink fresh, the amount undeniable. Tens of thousands reclaimed, not just money, but dignity returned in numbers. She slipped it into her leather purse and walked out into the warm Charlotte air, the smell of magnolias carrying from the sidewalk trees. For a moment she simply stood there, the sun on her face, knowing she had a choice to hoard or to build. She chose to build. Weeks later, the announcement appeared in the local paper: the Evelyn Parker Scholarship Fund, established for Charlotte students. The first of its kind, it promised to cover tuition for hard-working teenagers who couldn't afford college otherwise. It was her quiet rebellion against Dana's greed, turning stolen money into futures Dana could never touch. At the community center, the crowd that gathered for the launch filled every folding chair, the scent of brewed coffee and sugar cookies rising from the refreshment table. A banner stretched across the wall with Evelyn's name in bold blue letters. She stepped up to the podium, her voice steady though her palms trembled. "I was told I should crawl into a nursing home," she said, scanning the faces before her. "Instead, I decided to stand here and help others rise too." Applause swelled, not polite but thunderous, the sound of recognition. Cameras flashed, the heat of the bulbs warming her cheeks. Young parents clapped hardest, and teenagers whispered to each other in awe. Evelyn Parker, once underestimated, was now celebrated as a figure of resilience. The twist rippled further than she expected. Local news ran a segment titled "Financial Courage: Senior Turns Betrayal into Hope." Donations poured in, amplifying the fund, until it was more than her restitution, it was a movement. Evelyn's name became one spoken with respect across Charlotte. And while she rose, Dana fell. Dana Parker now stood behind a retail counter at the outlet mall, her designer heels traded for scuffed flats, her nails chipped from opening shipping boxes. The perfume of luxury boutiques she once haunted was replaced by the scent of dust and cardboard. Customers barely looked at her name tag. Dana, nothing more. Rick was gone. He had packed his silence into a duffel bag and left months earlier, never answering her calls. The family she had believed she could control fractured into absence. Dana went home to an empty apartment each night, scrolling through news articles about her mother's scholarship fund, each headline another dagger. Evelyn read those same articles with quiet satisfaction. Sitting on her porch with Janice, sipping sweet tea as the cicadas hummed, she let the peace settle around her. "She wanted me gone," Evelyn said at last, her gaze on the horizon where the sun melted into orange and gold. "Now she's the one forgotten." Janice chuckled, raising her glass. "That's the crawl she earned." For a long while, they sat in companionable silence, the air warm, the scent of cut grass drifting from a neighbor's yard. But Evelyn wasn't finished. Her victories weren't just for her community, they were lessons, warnings, a story waiting to be told. That evening, she sat at her desk, a fresh leather-bound notebook before her. She uncapped her pen, the ink pooling dark at the tip, and wrote across the first page in careful, deliberate script, "Crawling over ruins." The memoir had begun. The ballroom glowed with soft light from chandeliers, the clink of glasses and hum of conversation filling the air. Banners lined the walls. Charlotte's Senior Advocacy Gala. Evelyn Parker stood near the stage, a corsage pinned neatly to her dress. For a moment she felt the same nerves she once felt before morning assemblies at the school where she'd worked, but tonight she wasn't standing behind a desk. She was the guest of honor. The host tapped the microphone, his voice rising above the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate courage. The courage to confront betrayal, to demand justice, and to inspire a community. Please welcome Evelyn Parker." Applause thundered as Evelyn walked to the podium. The scent of lilies drifted from the centerpieces, the heat of the spotlights warming her shoulders. She steadied herself, both hands resting on the lectern. "I was told to crawl," she began, her voice even, strong. "But instead of crawling away, I stood taller. And when I stood, others stood with me." The crowd leaned forward, captivated. Families in the front row, young couples with children, nodded, their faces shining with recognition. Evelyn's story had traveled beyond her street, her courtroom, her betrayal. It had become theirs too. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her. A mother with tired eyes and a baby on her hip thanked her. "You gave us hope," she said. "If you can fight for what's yours, maybe we can too." A teenage girl hugged her, whispering, "I want to be strong like you." Evelyn's throat tightened, but she smiled, holding the girl's shoulders gently. Strength isn't about never falling, it's about refusing to stay down. Across the room, Harold Benton watched with quiet pride. He approached once the line thinned, his suit as crisp as ever. "You never flinched," he told her, "even when most would have buckled." That composure, it carried the case. Evelyn gave him a small nod, her gratitude unspoken but clear. Harold didn't linger long, slipping back into the crowd with the same precision he brought to every battle. Janice, however, stayed glued to her side, grinning like a proud sister. "Look at you," she whispered. "From gardening gloves to standing ovations. She thought she'd bury you, Evelyn, but you've planted yourself deeper than she ever imagined." Evelyn laughed softly, a sound both weary and triumphant. For once the laughter didn't carry bitterness, it carried release. That week Evelyn sat at her desk, the fresh draft of her will spread before her. The grandchildren's names were written clearly, each line cementing their inheritance. Scholarships and charities filled the rest. Dana's name was gone, erased completely, as though it had never belonged on those pages to begin with. Evelyn signed the document with steady hands, the scratch of her pen final and freeing. "Done," she whispered, sealing the folder. But her future wasn't just ink. Evelyn had plans to make her house more than a fortress. It would be a sanctuary. The following morning, contractors arrived, their trucks rumbling in the driveway. She stood on the porch as they unloaded supplies, lumber, steel, fresh soil for the gardens. The air carried the sharp scent of cut wood and fresh paint. One team prepared to install new ramps, another checked blueprints for updated security, and a landscaper arranged seedlings for a redesigned garden. Evelyn watched it all unfold with a serene smile. Her home had been the battleground, but now it would be the symbol of her independence, impenetrable, alive, and hers alone. The waters of Lake Norman glimmered like liquid bronze beneath the setting sun. Evelyn Parker stood at the overlook, her hands resting lightly on the weathered wooden rail, the breeze tugging at the hem of her cardigan. The air smelled of pine and cool water, tinged with the faint sweetness of wild flowers blooming along the shore. Every breath she drew felt deeper than the last few years combined, as though her lungs had been waiting for this moment of clean, unburdened air. Janice Coleman sat on the bench beside her, laughing at something small. Maybe the ducks waddling awkwardly along the bank, maybe the sound of cicadas singing so loudly, it almost felt like an orchestra. For once Evelyn laughed with her, a laugh unsharpened by bitterness or anger, just laughter, pure and light. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Evelyn pulled it free, pressing it to her ear. Harold Benton's steady voice filled the line, clipped and certain. Case closed, Evelyn. No appeals. She has no ground left to stand on. Evelyn smiled, her gaze never leaving the water. Then neither do her lies. You're free, Harold added, and she heard in his tone something rare, not lawyerly detachment, but respect. Thank you, Harold, she said, her words soft but carrying weight. When the call ended, she slipped the phone back into her purse and let silence settle again between herself and the lake. Back home, she walked through the front door into a house reborn. The scent of fresh paint still lingered faintly in the air. The ramps gleamed with new wood, blending seamlessly with the porch. The upgraded locks clicked into place with a satisfying finality. And the garden, her sanctuary, was alive with blooms, colors spilling like brushstrokes across the beds. Evelyn moved slowly through the rooms, pausing at her desk where a leather folder sat neatly stacked. Inside were the documents for her new secure accounts, each one in her name alone, each one fortified against intrusion. She had double-checked the signatures, the numbers, the protections, independence, signed and sealed. Janice arrived later with a bottle of sparkling cider, and the two women sat at the kitchen table, glasses clinking lightly. The house was quiet, filled not with tension but with calm, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind through open windows, the faint rustle of garden leaves outside. You did it, Janice said, her eyes shining. She thought she'd force you out. Instead, you're standing taller than ever. Evelyn's hand traced the rim of her glass, her voice low, almost a whisper. Peace doesn't crawl, it stands. For a long time they sat without speaking, the weight of everything that had come before, melting into the ease of shared silence. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the window, where the last streaks of orange faded into the quiet of night. Later, alone in her bedroom, she slipped beneath the quilt she had sewn years ago, the fabric soft with age. The house around her was steady, hers in every sense of the word. She closed her eyes, letting sleep approach not with worry but with ease. In her mind, Dana's voice still echoed, crawl into a nursing home. But Evelyn's answer had already been carved in action, in justice, in permanence. And as she drifted, her final thought shaped itself into words she would never need to repeat aloud, because they were written into the life she now lived. My daughter said I should crawl into a nursing home, so I rolled her dreams into bankruptcy instead.